It's why we did the investigation in the first place. And security is so lax. When you look at the cluster sites, they're just as bad. I mean, we found, if I showed you pictures tonight about the conditions, your heart would go out. If you were at all human, you would feel that way. So part of it is our tax dollars, because we do, first of all, we're required by law to help people find shelter, and it's also the right thing to do. We do pay a social service budget. We do have to have more transparency. Clearly, what we found yesterday was the whole daycare system and shelters is so different from the daycare centers everywhere else. Everywhere else, there are permits, there's inspections, there's a whole host of things you have to do to make sure a child is safe. In a homeless shelter, kids can run around and have no sprinklers if there's a fire, no means of ingress, and the list goes on and on. So yes, the answer, short answer is we are paying, but we should get a better bang for our buck, and I do believe that.
What about the take care of people who are homeless or disadvantaged and poor people who've been living for hundreds of years? And that's what they're devoting their life to. Why don't you talk to these experts rather than talking to an individual who owns a hotel and is only interested in his own benefit? The second thing is, instead of using the taxpayers' dollars to finance these homeless shelters, why don't you go to Wall Street and raise triple tax exempt bond fund called the homeless shelter, and people here in Maspeth, including myself, would buy those bonds in denominations of $25, $50, $100,000, and I don't pay any city, state, and federal taxes. Why don't you use that route to fund the homeless shelters instead of the taxpayers' money?
Seem a little liberal to me.
Controller Street.
We're always going to use some of our taxpayer dollars to help social service issues in the city. It's not just homeless people, but we provide in the city a lot of resource for people who struggle. Middle-class people, people with kids who have disabilities. We help people who have rough patches, and that is part of what the city budget is about. Now, what you're also talking about, and I think your Wall Street reference is interesting. I promise I'll get back to you. I'll talk to our economists. But part of what we have to think about is new means of financing. Philanthropy is very powerful. But look, there's a whole national movement or a discussion about social impact bonds, and that actually does relate to Wall Street and seeing if you can get a solution. So you're actually not far off about that. This is a financing scheme for good purpose that involves the financial community, and I've worked both as a borough president and now thinking about that, and that's a national discussion, but you're not far off about that. Let me.
Thanks for being here tonight, Controller. As the person who oversees the finances, we have people checking into Maspeth, which I assume is on a voucher system. We have Jamaica, 2 shelters going on a third. There are 60,000 people in the homeless shelter system right now, possibly going up to 70,000. How do we keep track? First of all, are there contracts? Christina asked already, are there contracts? Maybe not just with Maspeth, but with all the shelter system. Does Mayor de Blasio have a contract system out? How do we oversee that contract system? And how do we know that our taxpayer money is being used efficiently and not wastefully?
Well, that's my job.
Do we have books to see it? Can we see?
Well, let me answer your question. Part of what we do is when a contract, whether it's for a homeless shelter or any other type of facility that requires a contract, the controller's office looks at that contract. So for example, the one thing that we have focused on is when a contract comes from a provider, we make sure that one, the financial applications are in order, We then look at building violations, fire violations, and we look to see if that contract, the proper supportive documentation has been submitted. That is what the charter requires me to do. When that paperwork, and I don't mean it's ministerial paperwork, when we don't have a list of violations and the proper financing, as you know, because you read about in the newspaper, I kick it back and say, do it again, and do it again, until we are assured that all of that is in order. Maybe it's because I grew up in Washington Heights, which is right near the Bronx, and I remember the Happy Land fire. And I know there's a lot of kids and people in conditions that aren't great, and I want to make sure that on my watch, I do everything I can to meet my responsibility that nobody will be hurt, and that's the review that we do.